Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Baggage Claim Podcast with your host, Hatu. And I have a very special guest with me today, and it's actually my husband, AJ. And we just finished watching a Netflix documentary. I'm not sure if anybody has seen it. It is called, let me get back to Netflix here. Oh my gosh, what was it called? The Hell Camp, the Teenage Nightmare. And I don't know if you've seen it or if you haven't, but one thing that I know we were going to be talking about here is childhood trauma and how to break cycles and get out of mindsets and like really look within and heal yourself. And the powerful stories of the people or the teenagers in this documentary just really sent us into a conversation. And I'll give you a brief overview. So I'd say late 80s, early 90s, families and parents were not seeing their children go down right paths, so to speak. Children were either being, what's words for it? Drug abusers, leaving, fighting, defiant, stuff like that. And so the only outlet that these parents saw was to send their kids to these wilderness therapy camps, so to speak. And the very first one that it starts off with is this 500-mile, 63-day tour through the Utah desert. And kids have to spend their whole 63 days. They don't get a hot meal. They don't get to bathe. When they use the bathroom, they had to wipe themselves with their own clothing. Girls didn't have feminine products. They didn't have medical care.
No basic essentials, basically.
Yeah, like no basic essentials. Like we go camping all the time, and those are the basic things that we take. Like we like to be in wilderness. Yes, it's a therapy, but also not having your necessities is abuse, right?
Right.
So these parents ended up sending their kids to these camps, and this one guy was like raking in 15 to 20 grand per child.
Right.
And so he found it as a very lucrative business. And then he was going into all these shows, and people were sending their kids here. And until he came under a lot of scrutiny because there was this one young lady, she had only been there for 3 days. She had died while doing a 5-mile hike. And this guy got off on this fucking shit. We were just sitting here trying to imagine, first of all, he got off on it. The business, the camp got off on it. But somehow we think the parents are somewhat responsible for sending their kids into this type of situation. So let's talk about this. I think I would have so much guilt if my child was acting defiant and just out of hand, and I decided that was my last resort, right? Which I don't think it's my last resort, because I really like to look in the mirror at myself and see what's wrong with me.
Right.
What did I do to cause this situation? And I think that I've been conditioned to do that. Or I've trained myself, let me not say conditioned. I really trained myself to look within, because I feel that with my childhood trauma and the things that had happened in my childhood, and I've had to go through therapy, you've really got to talk it out. There's 2 sides to every story. There's the right, the wrong, and then there's always the third side. So there's 3 sides to every story. And the way that I grew up, and your central nervous system and everything, the way that you react to certain situations is what causes you to get emotional or causes you to go down certain paths because you may or may not know better. So what we were talking about was we felt that these parents should have been held responsible for the death of their kid out there in the middle of this freaking desert.
Well, the second camps that he opened, because he got in trouble for the first camp, kids were staying 6 months, 9 months, a year and a half.
Right.
I just don't see how you can, as a parent, I guess you can get desperate and you want your kids to get the help that they need, but it starts inside the home. And if you can't get the kid the help that they need, what makes it okay for you to throw that kid into another place that if you couldn't get the kid help, how can someone else that you don't even know, or they're going all the way across the country, get them the help that they actually need and you not be responsible for it?
Right. Like you signed that document that said, I want my kid to be in the fucking heat in the Utah wilderness, or I think he was in the U.S. Virgin Islands on a freaking boat for months and traveling the Caribbean, didn't know where these kids were.
No, because he didn't have an actual business and he was just setting up camp in these islands. And when these islands found out what he was doing, he would take off and go to a different island with the kids. And the kids had no idea where
kidnapping.
That's exactly what it was, kidnapping. But it's the parents gave him permission. So technically, it's not really kidnapping.
But the thing is, I feel like this situation just created trauma on trauma, right? So these kids were already troubled from the get-go. And again, I think troubled children, some of it is medical diagnosis, right? There are some things that you cannot control that they may have to be medically
Yeah, I mean, you have depression,
taken
ADHD,
care of.
You have a lot of different things that someone yelling at somebody is not going to fix.
Right. But a lot of these parents, and they don't show this part in the show, so we can't vouch for it, although they have some of the children that say their parents never did the work on themselves, right? Example for that one man.
Well, there was one man there with his dad, and his dad actually said, if I could have left you there your whole life, I would have.
Well, because when he came back after being there for a year,
it didn't do anything.
He relapsed into his drug habit after about a month, which entails that the wilderness camp doesn't really work. It's parenting, right?
Parenting, 100% parenting.
It comes back to parenting. So a lot of these parents didn't take responsibility for their own actions, and they didn't take responsibility for raising their own kids, and they didn't take responsibility for their kids' emotions. Like teenagers, they have their own emotions, they have their own thoughts, they have their own feelings, but how they feel is conditioned by your parents from the very beginning.
Right.
So if you feel neglected, and like a lot of these kids said that they were acting out because their parents worked so much. Their mom was sick and couldn't take care of her. So that's neglect. There's 7 or the 6 basic human needs that we have discussed in a couple of earlier podcasts.
And to kind of defend some parents that are having to work a lot, because I was that parent in my first marriage. I worked a lot. You think you're doing the right thing, but when you're in it, you don't really see it. You're just seeing the behavior of your child, and you're not able to make the connection as to why the child is behaving the way they're behaving. Now, I'm very active in my kids' lives. I'm in all their sports. I'm helping coach my son's wrestling team. We hang out when they're with me all the time. I try to speak and talk to them. I try to treat them like little adults, because that's in general, that's what they are, as little adults.
Well, that's how they want to be treated. I remember as a child wanting to be treated that way.
And with your background and my background, both from our parents, we weren't treated that way. We were treated as basically cattle, and we were cattle. We were told what to do, when to do it. We were told when to eat, when to go to sleep, everything that we did was controlled by our parents, was repetitive. It's and with our kids, I guess we're a little bit more open-minded, and we're very conscientious in how we're not perfect. We still make mistakes, obviously, as parents, but you have to be able to look inside yourself and see, okay, why is my kid acting this way? What's really bothering them? The issues are, these last couple of years with my daughter, she's 14 and my son's 11, they blow up. And then after talking to them for like 15 or 20 minutes, you realize that the the blow up wasn't about something simple or small. You know, it's a deeper.
But let me
issue.
expand on that real quick, because when you say they blow up and then we have a conversation, I never had that as a kid. So I think that's where it's different, right?
Right.
When I would have an emotional breakdown, I was wrong, I was crazy, I was overreacting, I was hormonal, right? I was shamed for the way I reacted, rather than I react, I go away to calm down, and then I have a conversation. Mm-hmm. So your central nervous system is really what regulates your emotions, right? And we have a conditioned state, and then we have a trained state. And your conditioned state is what you've lived in the most. Now, again, I'm not a psychologist by any means. I'm really into this stuff. But I've realized, you know, when you have those moments of outburst, a lot of times it's not who you are, but it's your nervous system that's responding to stress and overwhelm. You know, I've trained myself now to be more calm and relaxed, but when I get in certain situations and I overreact and I snap or I'll get aggressive, right? But that's because when I would get overwhelmed to that point, I never had someone to sit and talk to me and talk out that situation.
Right.
So I think that's what we've realized from our childhood, that, you know, we never had someone help regulate our emotions. So it's like now that we have very high emotional intelligence, right? We can see what's wrong and what we're doing, so that when we have a situation where our kids explode or have an outburst, we let them hang out for a minute, and then we go in there and then we talk to them and make them realize what had just happened, right? We don't shame them for having an emotion, because everybody has emotions.
Right. And I guess like me growing up, you know, you would have outbursts and you were shamed. I didn't even know you could have outbursts. Like, we weren't allowed. My dad was physically abusive, verbally abusive. It was always tiptoeing around the house. You weren't allowed, like, didn't see any kind of affection towards my mom or towards us. Like, just cold, very, very cold. And
do you feel like that was a culture thing, or what? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
No, that's not a culture thing. That's an abusive state of mind, be it American, Palestinian, Japanese, Canadian. The culture thing, it's definitely not a culture thing, because I mean, I have friends that were American, that were white, that were abused, or black that were abused. You know, I don't, that whole culture thing, I think, is BS. I don't.
We're conditioned by the media to think
that it's culture. No, but every culture has its abuse. Every culture has its, you know, there's a lot of people that don't know how to regulate or look within themselves to see what's wrong with them and what they do. You know, narcissists, for an example, they don't know that they're narcissists.
Right.
They think that everybody else's view is wrong and that they're always right. And until the narcissist can see and look within themselves that they're narcissists, they'll never be able to see it.
Yeah. And we have our own experiences.
On all ends.
On multiple ends with that. And, you know, you and I, when we first met, like, we were damaged people, right? We came to each other damaged, but during that process,
I think I was in a better situation mentally, because I had gone through.
You had already done the grieving process before, right?
I had gone through therapy for a few years before I met you. So I had found myself, started exercising, started finding my hobbies and things that I like doing. You still weren't quite there yet.
Well, I mean, I wasn't. It took me a while. But the thing is, we're here now, right? We really saw each other as damaged inner children, right? We saw each other's inner child and how we were kind of trained and conditioned into our first marriages, right? Through our inner child work. It's how we were conditioned and trained and talked to and shamed and abused as children that made us think that the path that we had went down initially was where we needed to go.
Right.
And then when we found each other, we knew it felt right, but other people didn't. And we still struggled with, how are we going to do this together? And anyways, that's a whole nother conversation, because our story is even more depth. But I really think we healed each other's inner child.